humanist perspective presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow. Hello again. Thanks for watching our show. I'm Harry Greenberger, the president of the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, and for a long time, the host of this show. Well, our guest today is a longtime associate of ours. It's been a few years, but Walter Block and I have maintained some email contact over the years. But Walter, it's good to see you in person again. Now, Walter Block was awarded the Harold E. Worth Eminent Scholar Endowed Chair. That's at Loyola University in New Orleans, and he's a professor of economics at Loyola. In addition to teaching on a full-time basis, Walter is a prolific writer. And I just want to give you folks some idea of the books that he has authored. This year, 2012, his newest book is titled Yes to Ron Paul and Liberty. And that book is currently available at Amazon. In 2010, his book was called The Case for Discrimination. Also in 2010, he wrote a book called Differing Worldviews. Two scholars argue cooperatively about justice education. In 2010, that's 3 books for 2010, he wrote Building Blocks for Liberty. Now, 29, his book was called The Privatization of Roads and Highways, Human and Economic Factors. Now, that concept of privatization of roads and highways gets a lot of people up in arms. 2008, his book was Labor Economics for a Free Market Perspective, Employing the Unemployable. And similarly, in 2008, his book was called Defending the Undefendable. Well, Walter, you have some provocative titles there. Now, which I think appeals to at least the intellectuals. And I'm told that in your current book, on the back cover of your current book, Ron Paul, whom everyone knows, wrote, Walter Block is one of the top writers and scholars in the liberty movement. It's an honor to have Walter as a friend and supporter. Well, let's today, on this session, let's talk about free enterprise capitalism. I understand that is probably the most important concept in your thinking. Tell us about free enterprise capitalism.
Well, before I do, let me just say it's a pleasure to be back with you. I regard us as old friends. We don't agree on everything, but that's what makes interesting conversations.
Thank you.
Free enterprise is an economic system that is predicated on private property rights and voluntary interaction. No coercion. Nobody can force anyone to do anything. All intermediation, all interaction is voluntary. So, for example, if I want to trade you your pen for my tie, I have a tie, you have a pen. I say, hey, Harry, I like your pen. Do you want to trade it for my tie? And
if we're both willing.
And if we're both willing, then we make the trade.
I'll bet you're not willing to give me your tie.
No, I'm not, but for hypothetical purposes. And on the other hand, if you're unwilling, then I can't force you.
All right.
There's no
But
force.
now you used a word there, property rights. As I recall, in what was it, the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, where they dropped that, where life, liberty, and property, and they dropped property out. They said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yes.
Why was property left out at the founding of the nation?
Well, I'm not historian enough to know why it was dropped out, but I am ethicist enough, if I can pat myself on the back in that regard, to say that they shouldn't have dropped property. You can't pursue happiness without property. Property rights are just a shorthand form to determine who has a right to use what. Now, I have a property right to this tie. You have a property right to that pen. So it saves a lot of hassle. If we didn't have property rights, we wouldn't know who has a right to this tie. We wouldn't know who has a right to that pen, and we'd be squabbling forever. Whereas this way, it's clear. That's your pen. This is my tie. That's your shirt. This is my jacket. We both have cars outside of the studio. I'll go to my car after we're finished. You'll go to your car. Property rights, you have to have property rights, because property rights is just a rule as to who can do what.
But there are many instances where more than one entity or person claims the rights to the same piece of property. How is that handled?
Well, with great difficulty. Now, the libertarian view as to how property rights emanate or how they're justified starts with John Locke, who said that the way you get to own virgin territory, land that has not been used ever before, is you homestead. You mix your labor with the land, you get to own it. So I might mix my labor with the land and I grow corn. You might capture a wild cow and domesticate it, and now you have milk. And so it all stems from the initial ownership. And by the way, we start with ownership of the person. Like, I own this person, you own the body inside of your clothes.
If there's anything we're entitled to, it's the right to ourselves.
Right. So,
all right.
So slavery is ruled out of court right away.
Yes.
Because slavery would mean that I own your body or you own my body, and own means the right to dispose of any way I want. And that would be pretty much anathema to libertarianism. Okay.
You mentioned libertarian. Are you a libertarian with a capital L or a lowercase l, or neither?
Both. Libertarian with an uppercase L is a supporter of the Libertarian Party.
It's a political party.
It's a political party. Gary Johnson is now running for office, and I'm a big supporter of his.
And what are the principles of libertarianism?
Well, the principles are the non-aggression principle. Keep your mitts to yourself. Don't grab me or my property without my permission. And property rights based on homesteading and ownership of the initial person. So I own myself, I homestead the land, I grow corn. You own yourself, you mix your labor with the cow, and you domesticate the cow, and now you have milk. How else can property rights be justified apart from initial self-ownership and ownership of those parts of nature that you homestead? The other ways are voluntary trade or anything peaceful. So, for example, we could now trade. You give me some milk, I give you some corn. I now have some milk, even though I didn't produce it. You have some corn, even though you didn't produce it. But we can each trace it back to original ownership of the body, original homesteading, and now a voluntary trade.
And that is what comes under the concept of free enterprise.
That's what free enterprise is all
But
about.
now the general perception of libertarianism is that libertarians want no government or minimum government. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How much government would a libertarian accept?
Well, there are various aspects or various subcategories of libertarianism. The most radical, the one that I espouse, would be anarcho-capitalism. There would be no government, and all government activities would be done by private enterprise. Governmental activities, for example, police, armies, courts, things like that. The next level of libertarianism would be minimal government libertarianism, where government has only one function, and that is to protect persons and property rights. And to that end, there are only three institutions that are justified. Armies, to keep foreign bad guys off of us, not to go out and imperialize the world. Police, to keep local bad guys off of us, not to uphold victimless crimes against pornography, prostitution, drugs. And three, courts, which would determine who the good guys and the bad guys are. So if we're having a dispute over this pen, the court would determine who has the pen, and presumably they would determine on libertarian basis, namely ownership, homesteading, legitimate title transfer. Now, one legitimate title transfer is barter. I just traded you a pen for a tie, and I also traded you a milk for corn. But there are other voluntary, legitimate title transfers. For example, I could have given you a gift. I could have said, Harry, I like you. You're my man. Here's some corn. You could have reciprocated or not with milk. Another one would have been gambling. I say, I'll bet you that it'll be sunny today, and I'll bet you some corn against some milk, and we could have a bet, and that would be a legitimate title transfer. And
but now, does there not have to be some source of documentation of ownership? Do you not need government to give a title to a piece of land or a bill of sale? How do you establish your ownership of anything?
Well, that's a good question, but you certainly don't need government to have a title service. You could have private title services. That would be a complication. See, what I'm trying to do is say, well, what's the ideal? How would it work? And what you're saying, well, suppose this is a dispute. How would we settle that? And we would look for evidence. They say possession is 9/10 of the law, so if I've got this tie, the presumption is it's my tie, and the burden of proof would be on you to say, hey, Block stole this tie from me yesterday, and I've got a picture of him in my closet grabbing this tie.
Yes.
But if you didn't have that proof or some sort of evidence, then presumption is that it's mine.
All right, but if there was a dispute, and you did mention courts, you think it's a legitimate function of government to provide a system of a justice system?
Well, as an anarcho-capitalist, I don't think there's any legitimate function for government, period. But for the second level of libertarianism, the minimal government libertarianism, or minarchism, it's sometimes called, that would be what the court would do. But we do have private courts. We have the American Arbitration Association. We have canon courts for Catholics. We have the Bet Din, which is a Jewish court. We have Sharia courts, which is a Muslim court. There are private courts and arbitration societies. Not everything ends up in a government court, even when we have government courts. The problem with government is that government violates the non-aggression principle. It sets itself up as the monopoly ruler of people, even when people haven't agreed to be ruled by the government. And it will not tolerate competition in its geographical territory, and it taxes you. It says you're going to pay whether you like it or not. Now, some people justify this and they say, well, we have a constitution, we have some sort of agreement, a civil society agreement, but I never signed anything. I never signed anything saying that Obama or Romney or whoever will become, or Gary Johnson, who will become the next president. I never agreed to be bound by them. Now, I think that as a libertarian, I'm obligated not to initiate violence, but I don't see why I have to pay them taxes. I didn't agree to that. There's no social contract. I'm not a Hobbesian. I don't think that we should give all power to the government and then the government will protect us. I think private defense agencies can do a better job of that.
No, when you were talking about I guess, defense of the country from outsiders, we have in our government, we have something called the Defense Department. Used to be called the Department of War.
More accurately.
Exactly. Whatever we're doing over in the Middle East, we are not defending the sanctity of the United States of America. But it slips off the tongue easily. Defense Department. which is consuming enormous amounts of our hard-earned income converted to taxes, which of course is your position that they shouldn't be doing that. You might accept, maybe unwillingly, a certain amount of our money going into true defense of our borders of our country. Is that correct?
Well, yes. This is roughly Ron Paul's position and Gary Johnson's position. Namely, right now we have something like 900 or 950 military bases in about 150 foreign countries.
Exactly.
And there are only 200 foreign countries. I sometimes think we've got military bases in countries that don't even exist. We've got so many. And they dare to call that defense? That's an abomination.
I was traveling around the world some years back and wound up in Greece, and I took they had an excursion boat that would go to various Greek islands, and I asked them at the time, because tourism was very low, I said, well, can I take this thing and stop at the first island, and when you come around again, go to the next one? So I can't tell you which Greek island I was on, but I rented a bicycle, and I was riding around this small island, and I see a great big sign that said, United States Coast Guard. Whose coast are we guarding?
Look, if any other country did that, suppose Brazil or Indonesia or China had soldiers in 900 countries, 250 countries, 900 bases, we would all say, well, that's not defense, that's offense, that's imperialism. And yet the American people, for some reason, can't see themselves objectively. They say, well, we're the land of the free and the home of the brave or something. We're not free and we're not brave to push little countries around. The Ron Paul, Gary Johnson idea is maybe a strong Coast Guard. But no,
our coast.
Our coast,
yeah.
not the Greek coast, precisely.
Yeah.
So
now, I think the audience knows who Ron Paul is. Who is Gary Johnson?
Gary Johnson is the former governor of New Mexico. He was a two-time governor, and he is running for president of these here United States on the Libertarian Party ticket.
Oh, okay, all right.
So he is now our standard bearer. Ron Paul used to be our standard bearer, the person most associated with libertarianism. And Ron Paul will be again, but right now it's Gary Johnson's turn. He's running for president.
Well, when we go to the polls to vote for the president, will he be on the ballot?
Oh, yeah. Well, he'll be on 47 states, and I think that includes Louisiana. Okay. And the other 3 states, there's some sort of dispute. But he will be on at least 47 state ballots. So certainly people would be free to vote for him in Louisiana.
Would you say that votes for him are coming from the Romney potential voter or not?
Probably he'll take more votes away from Romney than he would from Obama. It's a little unclear. I'm not, if I were faced with the choice of Obama versus Romney, I personally would pick Obama.
That's surprising.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I would pick him for the same reason that I picked him over McCain, because I thought McCain and Romney are more likely to nuke people, and I'm against nuking people.
All right.
Because nuclear power nuclear bombs can't be confined to the guilty. It's necessarily an offense.
They kill a lot of people. Yeah.
Kill a lot of innocent people. I don't mind killing guilty people who are coming at you with a gun or a knife. That's self-defense. So on economics, I think Obama is a socialist and a horrid person, and Romney isn't much better. But I think foreign policy is very important.
Okay.
But fortunately, we don't have to vote between Tweedledum and Tweedledummer. We can vote for Gary Johnson. Now, people say it's a wasted vote, but nothing that promotes liberty is wasted in my view. Liberty is a very important consideration.
All right. Well, now, considering the views you've already expressed, where does that place us in respect to Iran and possible nuclear missiles?
Well, the U.S. is, let's take Afghanistan first.
All right.
Ron Paul said we marched in there, we can march right out. I mean, the Soviets spent 10 or 12 years there. I think that's now our longest war. What in bloody blue blazes are we doing there? We're not defending.
We're accomplishing nothing.
We're accomplishing nothing. We're killing people with drones, and we're killing our soldiers, and we're killing innocent people there. We ought to march right back, and get out of Iraq. Now, Iran, Ahmadinejad is a weirdo. I'm no fan of his. I mean, all these threats, Israel will disappear and this and that, although I'm not sure whether he's been accurately translated in this.
But I think he's a psychopath myself.
Well, I prefer not, but I'll accept the
right.
psychopath. On the other hand, for the last several hundred years, Iran has not invaded anyone. An invasion is a bad thing. The Iraq-Iran war was an Iraqi invasion of Iran. So I don't see any reason for the U.S. to invade Iran. I think that, again, as Ron Paul has pointed out, that what's best for Israel is Israeli sovereignty. And right now, poor Netanyahu has to come here with a tin cup begging, and if the U.S. sneezes, Israel catches a cold. The way that this situation is undertaken is Israel has lost part of its sovereignty. It can't deal with its problems on its own. It's a sovereign country. It should deal with its own problems.
Except that they want our money.
Well, they want our money. They want our bombs. But Ron Paul got in trouble for being anti-Semitic. Why was he anti-Semitic? Because he was against Israel, giving money and bombs to Israel. But he's not just against foreign aid or military aid for Israel. He's against foreign aid or military aid for everyone. And collectively, we, the United States, give a lot more money and support and financial support to all the Arab countries put together, namely all of Israel's enemies. I think it's something like $12 billion, whereas we give only $4 billion to Israel. So if you reduce both of them, relatively speaking, you hurt Israel. But relatively speaking, you help Israel. So it's hard to reconcile that with anti-Semitism. And then you get these problems, if Israel wants to build some houses in Jerusalem, they have to get permission of, what's her name, Clinton, Hillary Clinton, or the U.S. They have lost their sovereignty. Look, the U.S. had a M.A.D., mutual assured destruction with the Soviet Union for many years, and never was a bomb exchanged, happily. Worst case scenario, Israel will do the same thing with Iran. But it's up to the Israelis. It's not an American problem. It's an Israeli problem.
All right. So if we saved all that money that's going into the military, our United States federal government spends a lot of money on other things. How do you feel about all the social welfare type expenditures? Much of it for people who apparently can't make it on their own. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that the U.S., what we're really now getting is the problem of poverty. What about the poor? I think that the U.S. government has created poverty. It doesn't solve poverty, and the less the government involves, the less it'll create poverty, and the more it'll get rid of poverty. Let me give you an example that I was on Russian television, and I got in a great difficulty with this, but I'm going to try it again. If you put a frog in boiling water, its metabolism is such that it'll just jump out. The water won't really hurt it in a long-range way, because it just jumps out, and it's, well, I wouldn't say fine, who wants to be put in boiling water, but it jumps out. If you put a frog in cold water and you heat it up slowly, the frog's metabolism is such that it doesn't realize the difference between this heat and that heat, and it stays in there and gets boiled. Slavery did not undermine the black family. Slavery to the black family was like boiling water. Now, during the slave period, the family was rent asunder. I mean, the wife would be sold here, the husband would be sold there, the kids would be sold there. So I'm not saying that slavery helped the black family during slavery. But after slavery, after 1865, black people were trying to get back together with each other, and they would have ads in the paper, Mary Lou, you were on this plantation, this is Hiram, where are you, let's get together. All through the last part of the 19th century this occurred. I looked at the 1910 census, And the black and the white family were about the same intactness, namely the number of illegitimate children or two-family-headed families. Blacks and whites, I think whites beat out blacks by 1 or 2%, something like that. So slavery was not able to break up the black family. As horrible as it didn't break up the black family. Yet, in Johnson in 1965, when the Great Society gets to rolling, the black family breaks up. Charles Murray, famous for the bell curve, wrote a book called Losing Ground. And what he said is that the government made an offer to a young girl who was pregnant better than what the father of her child could give her. All sorts of welfare and housing and medical care and this and that and the other. It broke up the black family. Now, why am I talking about the black family? Because we're talking about poverty. Mm-hmm. And there is no poverty in intact black families. I exaggerate a little bit. But virtually all poverty is from non-intact families. So if you have an intact family, you're not going to be on the poverty rolls, pretty much. Now, the misinterpretation, there was some people on this Russian TV said, well, Bloch favors slavery. I don't favor slavery. I just said that slavery was not as horrible as it was not able to break up the black family, whereas welfare was. And now people on the left come along and say, well, we have to have social welfare, we have to have aid for family-dependent children, we have to have unemployment insurance, we have to have all these policies to help the poor. These policies don't help the poor. These policies break up the black family. The family is the main protection against poverty. So what you're doing is breaking up the protection against poverty. You're creating poverty.
Okay, Walter, we got a couple minutes left. This time goes very fast.
Okay.
And I'm going to say, take this time to make whatever points for free enterprise capitalism you'd like to make.
Well, free enterprise capitalism is not only utilitarian and pragmatic in the sense that it'll cure poverty or not allow poverty to be created, but it's also the only just system. When you take money away from Peter and give it to Paul, you're violating the rights of Peter. And I don't care how much money he's got. I don't care if he's Mitt Romney or Bill Gates. I don't care how many zillions of dollars he's got. Theft is theft. Look, if I come up with a gun and I go to a rich person and say, hey, rich person, give me your money or I'll shoot you. It doesn't matter if I take the money and then give it to the poor. I'm still a thief. So not only is the welfare system creates poverty, but it's a violation of the libertarian non-aggression principle. How dare they come to rich people or poor people or anyone with a gun, and they're coming with a gun with taxes. If you don't pay, you go to jail. That's immoral, that's despicable, it's a violation of the basic element of libertarianism or free enterprise capitalism, which is the non-aggression principle.
Is there, to your knowledge, historically or presently, a good example of a country operating under free enterprise?
Well, not perfectly. There are countries that are closer, and then there are countries that are further away. I'm also involved in an econometric statistical analysis of countries to see which is the freest ones and which the wealthiest, and it's usually Hong Kong and Singapore.
Are the freest?
Are the freest countries. The U.S. used to be like 5th, but now we're 12th or 14th or something like that. Australia and Switzerland are ahead of us. So those would be the countries that most closely approach free enterprise and are very wealthy and productive.
But Hong Kong, doesn't that come under the Chinese communist control?
Yeah, well...
And yet they're still the most free enterprise?
Well, there's that movie, The Mouse That Roared, with Peter Sellers.
Uh-huh.
Hong Kong is the mouse that roared. In the Peter Sellers movie, this little duchy of whatever it was won the war against the U.S. In some sense, Hong Kong is beating China. China is not beating Hong Kong, but I'm talking before China took it over. But Singapore is a relatively free country, and it attracts people.
Walter, we got to go.
Okay,
Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me on your show again.
Well, we're going to have you another time.
Okay, great.
Thank you, folks, for watching our show. We hope you will be with us often.